I'll see you guys in the dark.
Okay, let's set the scene. I'm a 6th grade band student, 12 at the time, and I'm at my private lessons with my teacher for once. It was mid-December, and I was notified that since it turned out my mom hadn't paid for my lessons, I wasn't allowed to take them. Unfortunately, by the time I learned this, the late bus that would drop off after-school kids already left. I had tried to call my mom with the school phone. She didn't buy us any phones at all because she never trusted us. But she wasn't answering. I decided, screw it, and just started walking home. Now the layout of the area is like this. The front has a circle for drop-offs that lead to a road. This road also has a church towards the right of the school, if you look directly at the front. This road has another road that goes straight to the other side. On the opposite end of the road, there's a car wash and a mini mall. And on the other end of the road the school leads to in the front of the church is another, smaller church. I don't know why, there just is. It borders the suburbs most of the kids lived in. When I'm about to cross from the parking lot to the suburbs, a creepy salesman just jumps from behind me. He was a white, male, blonde, with brown eyes. I don't know what exactly he was wearing, but we'll just be safe and say he was wearing normal clothes. This is a conversation we had. Hey. Me turning around in confusion, with some surprise. Yeah? You want to buy some Christmas presents? I'm not a stupid kid. I've heard a multiple of scary stories about serial killers and all those other things. This guy immediately tipped my creepo radar by the gazillions. Not only that, but I'm a 12-year-old kid with no job and obvious student attire at like 9 to 10 at night, and dark outside too. Now, as I internally decide it'll be a cold day in hell before I do any interacting with this fellow, I answer with this, "No man, I'll see you later." After that, he just walked off. No pleading, no further interaction, no other creepy things. Just went away after that. I walked away quickly too, picking up a big stick I ran into just in case he came back. I started getting really paranoid as I walked back home, scared that he would end up returning with determination to do whatever he may have planning with me. I started to panic when I remembered just how far my apartment was and the actual route I would have to take to get there. I decided to walk back, returning to the front to see my mom yelling my name in tears. When we saw each other, we did the stereotypical running and hugging thing in the movies. We both started crying. I would recognize that she was scared, and I started apologizing. She said that it was okay, and we went inside the front office. We told the front office ladies I was fine. She had asked for their help in finding me before I came back. I ended up learning that my mom noticed that I wasn't at home, and came to the school soon after I left. Had called all her friends to help find me in our apartments, and got some staff to help her look for me at school. We drove home, and I told her everything that had happened. She wasn't mad, and she was glad that I handled the salesman situation the way I did. When we went home, we let everyone know I was found, and that was the end of it. We never called the cops, but we still tell this story from time to time. I still have the stick, and if I look around, I can find it and show pictures. I never saw or heard of him again. So, to the creepy salesman who walked up to 12-year-old me at night trying to get me to buy your Christmas presents, let's not meet again. So it was the summer of 2013. I'm 21 and just finished my junior year in college. The second week of August, a group of my friends and I go on an 8-day camping trip. It's 7 of us in total. There's 4 guys and 3 girls. We're camping in a semi-remote campground in the White Mountains of NH. It was a large campground, but very few other campers were there. There were a few filled sites near the front of the campground, but we purposefully requested a site off in the back corner. We were completely by ourselves. During the trip, we planned a white water rafting trip for one of the other days. We were hiking Mountain Washington towards the end of the trip, and thought maybe we'd do 1 to 2 other small hikes, with 1 to 2 days of just chilling by the lake at the campground. We also planned on doing plenty of drinking during the evenings. The first couple of days, the trip was fantastic. Whitewater rafting was a blast. Everything is going just great. So it's the evening of our 3rd day. We have a roaring fire going. We're all just hanging out at the campsite drinking and fucking around. It's around 9:30 when a disheveled-looking man walks past our site. His clothes are kind of torn and worn out. Messy, tangled hair. He looks like he's maybe in his mid-40s. This isn't weird, though. We all just think it's another camper doing a late evening stroll around the campground. About an hour and a half later, we see the same man walk past our site in the same direction. This time, he walks a little slower. Almost with a bit of a limp this time. We're all pretty drunk at this point. I think one of us might have yelled something out to him, but he just ignores us and keeps on walking. Mildly strange, but still, it probably just was someone who wanted to take a long walk. We wrap up the night at around 1:30 to 2. The fire is dying down, and we head back to our tents. I usually love sleeping while camping. I usually find it extremely peaceful, but for some reason, I was having trouble sleeping this night. I get up to go pee in the woods, and when I do, I see a faint light maybe about 50 to 75 yards ahead of me in the woods. It looks like a dim flashlight or something familiar. I decide I want to investigate it. I go back to the tent. One of my other buddies is still awake, so I tell him about it. We get up to investigate, and when we do, the light is no longer on. Feeling a little unnerved, I shine my flashlight around the woods a little bit, but don't see anything, so I decide maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me before, and I just head back to bed. Sometime later that night, I wake up to a terrifying scream. It was Sarah, one of the girls that we were camping with. I jump out of my tent as quickly as possible, and nearly run into her as she's running back into our site. She's still screaming, though. She screams that there was a man standing in the middle of the woods. Now our whole party is awake and freaking out. I try to calm Sarah down enough to get her to explain what had actually happened. She says she went to pee in the woods and saw the man from earlier just standing about 15 feet from her, not moving, like a statue. We're all freaking out, yelling, screaming, making a giant commotion. I'm internally freaking out too, but try to calm everyone down enough so that we can actually go do something. We obviously decide to get the fuck out of there. We frantically take down our tents, basically just ripping the poles out and throwing everything back into our cars. Then we speed out of there. It's around 4 a.m. We're in 2 separate cars and decide to just drive away from the campsite and try to clear our heads. Eventually, around 5:30, we find a small diner that's open and decide to head in for some breakfast. We all have different theories about what the hell just happened. Some of us think we just ran into a homeless guy who was camping out in the woods and was surprised by us. Some of the girls think maybe he was purposely stalking us. Either way, obviously none of us are comfortable staying at that campground again. I head back to the front desk of the campground with the 2 other guys. We explain what happened, and the guys at the front desk actually seemed to believe us, but said there was definitely no other campers currently that fit the description of the guy. They were insanely nice about it, though, and actually refunded most of the remainder of our stay, which astonished me. As a group, we decided that fuck it. We weren't letting one freaky guy ruin our trip. We go and find another campground that's a good ways away to stay in. Fast forward about 2 days. We're hiking Mount Washington. We get up real early and get the mountain at around 7:30 to start hiking up. We're a little over halfway up the mountain and we see the very same guy hiking down. Though this time, he looks much better. His hair isn't crazy. His hiking clothes are relatively clean this time. We're all just frozen. A few of us let out a surprised scream. He just strolls past us with this massive grin. Luckily, there are enough hikers nearby that nothing could really happen. We decide to continue hiking up anyways, since he is headed to the opposite direction, and hope we just never encounter him again. We did finish the hike, and luckily didn't see him. After that, we decided to cut the trip a couple days short. Looking back on it, we've all come to the conclusion we were likely being stalked in some way. If it was just some homeless guy in the woods near the campground, what the hell is he doing hiking down Mount Washington a couple days later? It was pretty unnerving and a bizarre incident for sure.
This happened when I was 8 or 9 years old in mid-November, early December. My family had moved to an apartment near the Calvik docks. My family consists of my, at the time, only 2 brothers. My younger brother, Elliot, who was a year younger, and my youngest brother at the time, James, who couldn't have been more than 3 or 4. My mom and her husband, we spent about a week tidying the place up, meeting the neighbors, and getting used to the new house. One neighbor in particular stands out to me, Jenny. She was scrawny with long black hair, and her skin was sagging a bit, which I assumed was because of old age. One day, she just let herself in and excitedly greeted us. She came to me, knelt down, and said something along the lines of, "Hey, you take Ritalin?" Note, I have ADHD, and I take it to reduce my hyperactivity and improve my concentration. Cool, so do I. Let's be friends. I remember her breath smelled awful. It was like she brushed her teeth with a rotting fish carcass and washed it down with alcohol. She said a quick goodbye before leaving. What couldn't have been more than 10 minutes later, one of our neighbors came down and told us to be careful around Jenny and that she was a drug addict. That's probably why she was so skinny and why she looked older than she was. My mom didn't seem the least surprised. Being as young as I was, I had no idea what they were talking about. All I knew was that she was bad news, and that scared me. Over the next few weeks, Jenny terrorized everyone who lived in the building. She knocked on the door of our apartment on almost a daily basis, and we weren't exactly in a position to ignore the knocking. She had recently threatened an old lady with a baseball bat, and we didn't know what she'd do if we ignored her, and honestly, we didn't want to find out. One day, Jenny came down to us high off her ass and started ranting about how she hated it when siblings fight, and especially when they hit each other. As most of you probably know, every sibling on the damn planet fights from time to time, and as much as I hate to admit it, we weren't above hitting each other either. So James tells Jenny that we hit each other sometimes. I shit you not, the crazy bitch grabs me by the throat and lifts me up and says if you ever do it again, I will fucking kill you. I thought I was going to die at the moment, but after what feels like an eternity, she let me go, only to pick up James and swing the poor guy around like a fucking sword. That was the last straw. My mother called the police soon after, and they took her away. She was released after about 48 hours, at which point it was almost Christmas. Terrified that Jenny would hurt us again, Mom sent Elliot and I to my father's house to spend the rest of our Christmas vacation. James, my mother, and her husband were fine, but I feel extremely guilty that we couldn't take them with us. Jenny was arrested soon after, and I haven't seen her since. I hope it stays that way. So crazy drug addict lady who nearly killed me, you owe me for taking my innocence, so for your sake, let's not meet again.
So this might be long and filled with useless info that I haven't thought about since it happened. Only now that my brother asked if I remembered what happened when we were younger. When I was 13, I'm now 24, my family and I, my single mother, older sister who was 16, and younger brother who was 8, moved into a 2-story house across town. So it's Saturday, our first weekend there, and my mom and sister had gone to visit my other sister about an hour away, and would be back in the evening. A pair of brothers, who were 13 and 16, that we grew up with, who lived a few houses down from our old house, came over to check the new place out. It was about noon, and we were upstairs showing them around when we heard knocking at the front door. Mitchell, as we call him, the older brother, said he'd answer it, and I went with him. It was a middle-aged man, and he immediately asked if there was any adults home he could speak to. Mitch told him our parents were at the store and they'd be back soon. The man was holding a 3-pack of Febreze cans and said he was selling them and wondered if we'd be interested in buying some. Mitch told him no thanks, and if we needed some, our parents would be getting it already. The man thanked us for our time and told us to have a good day. We went back inside, and I watched him from the window as he walked down the road and turned a corner out of sight. But it stuck out to me that he hadn't gone to any of my neighbors' houses. I brushed it off and went about my day. At about 5 p.m., Mitch and his brothers left just as a couple of my other friends came over for a sleepover. My friends and I were getting upstairs in my room, putting stuff away while my little brother was in his room next to mine watching a movie. By this time, it's probably about 9 p.m. and getting dark when we hear a big thwack downstairs coming from the back door. I instantly got a pit in my stomach and felt it drop, and my mind went right back to the man that was here earlier. I went downstairs quickly into the kitchen to look at the back area where the door was, and I could see the shadow of someone moving outside. I turned to the kitchen light to alert them that someone was home. I was afraid to call the cops because I thought my mom would get in trouble since we were home alone. I ran upstairs and hid my brother in the linen closet, telling him not to make a sound until I came back. There was a small window halfway up the stairs that had an AC unit in it. It was old, and the top window was really dirty and hard to see out of. I sat down next to it and could hear whispering outside. That's when I figured it was more than just one person. I tried peering out the window, but it was hard to see. And I guess one of them tripped my neighbor's motion lights. That's when I realized why I couldn't see outside was because one of them was trying to see inside. The light only illuminated his outline, but I could see he was pressed against the glass with his hands cupped trying to see inside. I screamed at the sight, scaring him. I called the cops then, and they showed up just as my mom was getting home too. The cops said that they had gotten a few reports already of men going to random houses trying to sell Febreze. So, random Febreze salesman. Let's not meet again.
So this happened in the mid-90s in Miami during the Christmas holiday break when I was about 7 or 8. Tiny bit of personal backstory. My great-grandmother, Nana, second husband ended up sexually abusing his grandkids, who happened to be my aunts, and my father for over a decade. But it was never discovered or spoken about until after he had passed away. About the same time I was born, so thankfully I never met him. But as we all know, that kind of abuse can seriously alter your view of the world around you. In this case, it made my family hyper-vigilant about protecting me, and I wasn't allowed to go outside alone, or sleep over at anyone else's house, ever. Okay, now back to the story. Since I was born, Nana had always lived with us. Before I was school-aged, I stayed home with her during the day, and once I began school, she would watch me whenever we had summer or holiday breaks. I loved her. She was a southern red-haired firecracker who took no shit from anyone, but had the biggest soft spot for me. So this winter break, I had just gotten new rollerblades. It was going up and down the paved walkway practicing. My Nana was on the porch reading and watching me, and then the house phone rang. She debated having me come inside while she went to answer it. Cordless phones weren't a thing yet, but I pleaded to stay as I was finally getting the hang of it. She reluctantly agreed and went inside to answer it, but she left the main door open so that she could still see me through the screen door. It took a few minutes for her to return, but during that time, nothing happened, so I think she was more at ease. She returned to her book, and I was now working on learning a few tricks. After maybe another half hour or so, she said it was time for lunch, and we had to go inside. I begged her to let me play just a little bit longer, and promised when she finished preparing lunch, I would come inside, no questions asked. She stood there watching me for a bit, but then she agreed, and again went inside, leaving the screen door open, and told me to sing while I skated so that she could hear me. I gladly belted our in-sync digital get down as I practiced. Moments later, maybe 2 or 3, a white van came down the street very slowly. They seemed lost, but I didn't pay it much mind because I was a kid unaware of the evils of the world. Plus, I was on the other side of the chain-linked fence, so I was safe. Even when it rolled up and stopped in front of the house, I kept on skating. It wasn't until the passenger door opened and an extremely tall man stepped out and asked me which was the highway. At this point, I was nervous, but I held onto the gate for stability and pointed in the direction. He made some small chat that I can't really recall, but it was along the likes of how was Christmas, what did Santa bring me, etc. And then he asked me if I wanted to have toys that his daughter didn't want, like a Barbie house and things. I was still silent, because now I was scared. The way he looked at me was dark. He was smiling, but his eyes seemed both joyful and vicious. It still unnerved me to this day. He slowly came closer to the gate and asked if I wanted to check out the toy. This is exactly what they taught about stranger danger in school and home. And so I shook my head and began to skate backwards towards the door, not wanting to take my eyes off of him, but also not wanting to yell or run because I didn't want to be rude if he was really just being a nice guy. He came closer to the point where he was only a few feet away from the gate and asked if my parents were home. Now all thoughts of politeness vanished, and I panicked. Yelled for my Nana and tried to run inside, which landed me promptly on my back, and I smacked the back of my head against the concrete. At the exact same moment, he unlatched the gate to come inside, and before he could get to me, my Nana came bursting through the door with a cast iron skillet in hand, cursing. He looks up and sees her, and then bolts. He hopped back in the van before the door could close properly. The driver was speeding down the street. My Nana bypassed me completely and ran after the van, screaming at them. And I later learned trying to get their tag, but there wasn't one. She picked me up and carried me inside, called the police and my dad while she asked what happened. 10 minutes later, I'm with the paramedics getting my scraped elbows patched up while my Nana spoke with the police. My dad showed up soon after, and I didn't go outside the rest of that break. Years later, in my late teens, it came up one Christmas in conversation, and I got more of the story. Turns out my Nana was on edge more than normal because there had been a man who had broken into a woman's apartment in Broward, just a city over from us, and had been assaulted just before Christmas, and still on the loose. The description my Nana and I both gave the police matched the rapist to the T. Bald spot, bright blue eyes, and well over 6 feet tall. We don't know if he ever got caught, or them, since I'm sure whoever was driving the van was 100% down with whatever evil plan that man had for me. But thank God for my Nana. Rest in peace, Nana. And creepy guy asking a child for directions. Let's not meet ever again. This started back in 2015, maybe 2016-ish. I try to blur most of his identity from my memory. During this time, a good friend of mine was working for a local chain restaurant, and one afternoon she invited me and another friend to come by for a St. Patty's Day drink after our shift at work. When we arrived, all fun and dandy, she got a couple of drinks, and everyone there was nice and respectful. Next thing I know, she comes over and points to a group of guys at the bar that were around my age, saying that they really want to say hi, so they asked me to come over. Let's just say this would have been my first red flag. But I was young and loved meeting new people, and thought, hey, these guys look innocent enough. Fast forward a few months later, and me and my friends were now really close with this group of 3 guys. Alec, the sweet one, James, the weird one, and Dan, the main story. We spent a ton of time together, always laughing and nothing awkward. These guys felt like brothers. A few weeks later, this Dan decided to profess his affection for me via Facebook Messenger. After politely telling me that I saw him more as a brother rather than a lover, he then decided to threaten me by saying he would, and I quote, "kill myself if you don't date me." Safe to say that I decided it was best to take some space from this whole group. After a few weeks of ignoring messages and asking for space, I finally caved and decided to talk it out, hoping things would maybe be normal again. Boy, was I mistaken. Alec and James slowly backed off and appreciated my space. To this day, I respect them for doing this while still being friends with Dan. On the other side of things, Dan continued to message me, telling me he missed me and that I was like a sister to him. The messages became more persistent than ever after multiple back and forths, asking him to leave me alone. He still refused to acknowledge that I no longer wanted contact. It got back to the extent that I had to block him on everything so that I wouldn't receive texts, Insta DMs, and messages on all platforms. Then he took it to the next level. Dan decided to change his phone number. Not once, not twice, 4 times. All so that he could message me. I couldn't believe the extent that he would go just to get me back as a friend, even after multiple threats that I would call the cops. On top of changing phone numbers, he would create new Facebook and Instagram pages, changing his name, using fake images or old ones. I have at least 2 to 5 profiles blocked on my Insta and Facebook. Finally, I thought it was over, until I received a message from my 2 friends Megan and Ashley, along with calls from both of my sisters. Hey, so is Dan trying to add me on Insta? My middle sister, Beth, even got messages saying, hey, why won't Gina talk to me? Along with multiples of the same messages to all of them. I was fucking fuming. It's one thing to harass me, but now, my family? Now I'm bringing it to my parents, who are not only scared for me, but scared he will show up at the house. He knew where I lived at the time. 2 years of this went by before I decided to do something. Now I know people may think, why did you wait so long? But it was really hard for me, and because I blocked and deleted so many messages, I didn't feel like I had the evidence to go to the police and file for harassment, as much as I wanted to. In early 2016, I noticed a profile. It was old pics of Dan, and all of his Facebook friends were youngish girls. I took a video of it and sent it to my sister to warn them in case he tried to contact them. In 2016, I met my current boyfriend, Harrison, my best friend and #1 fan. Luckily, during this, Dan only tried to add me on Insta once. I then deleted and never heard from him again. I assumed at this point he found a girl or realized he needed help. In October of 2018, everything changed. A new guy started at my job who looked exactly like this guy. This was super triggering, so I texted Harrison right away so he could help me calm down. Not even 2 minutes later, he goes, "Have you Googled Dan recently?" Which of course I haven't. So of course I did. My jaw dropped. Dan pleaded guilty last year to incitement of a minor. I started shaking. I couldn't believe my eyes. I had to look up 5+ articles to believe it. I couldn't process whether I was feeling guilty for not seeing this sooner or if I felt relief. I called my mom and cried. I couldn't process this. I spent so much of my life being mentally harassed by someone, and for some reason blamed myself for this happening. I saw this page. I filmed it. I could have done something. I could have prevented this. Dan sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. This is my letter to him. Dear Dan, how could you? How could you hurt so many people? This girl, her family, your family. I'm still in shock, and I'm mad. You've done so much damage to so many good people. You've scarred families, friends, co-workers. For what? You are lonely. I hope you enjoy being lonely forever. Enjoy the cold walls of your cell. They match your heart. I wish I could see you one more time. I want to look you in the fucking eyes. I want an answer. Why? Why did you make me feel so scared? Why did you make this little girl believe you? Why? If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.